Tel Aviv 360, Israel's largest and most diverse podcast.
Okay, so thanks for joining us. Today I am joined with Professor Danny Orbach from the Ouniversity. Professor Orbach is a historian with specific expertise in military history, right? And I invited him today to talk about a very difficult topic, which is the war between Israel and Gaza. And we are conducting this interview in English, like the previous interview with Professor Shai Davidai, which was also in English, because I think this is a topic that is of interest to the entire world right now. Everybody is confused, angry. People have strong beliefs and opinions. This is a very horrible reality. I'm sure you would agree.
Absolutely.
And
war is hell.
War is hell. And there's, I think, having this discussion would be interesting to many people. To explore beliefs, their basis. Professor Orbach has studied the war from an empirical perspective, right? Trying to understand what it is, what it was. Maybe first, if you could tell us how you came about to be involved in studying this issue.
The reason actually has to do with epistemology. How do we know the things we know?
Yeah.
I study wars, and I know that interpretations often change, even decades later, when we discover new documents. And I was astounded by the amount of certainty that I saw about the Gaza war, especially from critics of the Gaza war. People were so quick to jump to legal and moral conclusions using terms like genocide and others. And I said, stop for a moment. Let's try to find out empirically what actually happened in Gaza, and not through intermediaries, reports of also NGOs and UN organizations. I want to get as close to the primary sources as I can, just like I'm doing when I'm studying Japan in World War II or any other subject that I'm studying. And here, I would say that this is my epistemological model. I think that the ground floor of any discussion is factual. What happened? Only then we move to ethical conclusions. And only then we move to legal conclusions. You can actually swap the place of the ethical and the legal, but you can never swap the place of the factual ground floor. But people don't do it. They jump to the top floor and then they change the facts accordingly. And we want to do it the hard way, as historians do, starting with the facts and jumping to ethical and legal conclusions later, if at all.
Yeah. So this is... The topic of this course is exactly trying to understand these epistemic processes as they take place in humans that try to understand their reality, the geopolitical reality here in Israel. So I interview people like you, people who are prominent researchers or just prominent figures in Israeli life who think about what is going on here, providing different perspectives. And today, yes, I wanted to ask you about the findings of your attempts to understand what happened and what is happening in Gaza and how you get there from an epistemological stance and trying to critique together what we think and how we come about to these things. Obviously, you've studied this immensely. I am also I haven't studied this academically, but like every other person living in Israel or even in the world right now, have been trying to piece together the factual picture and then draw the moral conclusions, and the legal conclusions are not our purview. So I just want to start with if you could explain what you studied and how in your report about the Gaza war.
Okay, first of all, I wrote the report with 3 other colleagues, Jonathan Boxman, Jonathan Braverman, and Yagil Hankin. And we wanted to examine the genocide allegations. The study is called Debunking the Genocide Allegations, but actually we gave the title only after we finished the study, because of course we cannot come to a conclusion before we did the research. Many criticized us for not opening the study with a chapter on the definition of genocide. You know, this is the usual academic thing, right? You start to define your subject. We didn't want to do it, and we didn't do it on purpose, because we believe that before you even get close to the legal definitions of genocide, you need to get into the zone. And in order to get into the zone when speaking about genocide is plausible, you need to at least prove that the perpetrating party tried to kill as many civilians as it could, or at least was completely indifferent to the killing of civilians and didn't try to minimize the killing of civilians. But this is, by the way, a necessary condition, but not a sufficient one. The Western allies in World War II, in their bombings, tried to kill as many German and Japanese civilians as they could, and yet nobody defines it as genocide. But if you don't have even that, the attempt to maximize killings, you don't even have to speak about definitions of genocide. So that was our main research question. Did Israel try to maximize or minimize civilian casualties? And then we checked it across several aspects, which I can, of course, speak about.
Before we go into this, because the details of this, which are important, I think, probably let's just put out there, shared assumptions that you and I and probably the listeners all share about the horror of the war, right? I'm sure that, or correct me if I'm wrong, that you find the situation to be horrible, that you were worried, right? When you went into doing this report, you would have whatever the response was, you would have...
Had I believe that Israel is committing a genocide, I would have said so. I don't believe it was the case. But I think your remark is a very good place to put another precautionary note. And it seems obvious, but people just don't get it. War is hell. War, any war, justified war, unjustified war, any war creates an immense amount of suffering, also to uninvolved civilians. Give me a camera and put it 24/7 in any historical war.
A camera.
And I'm going to give you an endless stream of horror pictures that are going to keep you awake at night. Why I'm saying it? Because people tend to see the immense suffering in Gaza, and it did keep me awake at night as well when I did this research, and assume, this is war crimes because people are suffering immensely. No, this is war. Crimes are the excess brutality above the suffering which is inherent to any war. I think that if you have an ideal war, which never exists, but just for the sake of discussion, that you keep, let's say, all the possible rules of war and all possible precautions, you will save 20% of the suffering which is inherent in any war. 80% is built in. So what I'm cautioning against is jumping to conclusions based on horrific results, because the horrific results are built in.
I think that it's important to note before we go into this that people may discount what you say if they assume that you are the type of person who thinks war is great, or that this war is that. But you're saying that, in psychology sometimes they ask us to give a positionality statement at the beginning of papers to understand who is this person that I'm listening to, so that you are a person who deeply cares about these things. Am I right?
Absolutely.
You said you did not sleep at night.
Somebody accused me recently of being, I'm quoting, an eroticist of war. No, I hate wars. I think that sometimes wars are justified. I think that sometimes wars are unavoidable. But war is hell. And I think this is the basic condition we should start from.
Yeah, and that's... Okay, so, and now under this ideological framework of a person who hates war, studies it because he hates it, perhaps?
Well, I think it's fascinating, but many bad things are
Yeah,
fascinating.
like psychopathy and like disease and like, it's for certain one of the main elements of human societies, right? And we want to understand it.
And by the way, if you hate war, you need to study it even more, not less, because not knowing about something is not a good way to prevent it.
Yes, for sure. So you were in a position to think very deeply about what is going on factually, and then you set out to understand the question first of whether Israel is trying to maximize or minimize civilian deaths. Can you explain what you found, and let's think about this together then?
Let's look at the various aspects that we study. First, and I think this is the largest chapter in our study, we study the issue of food in Gaza. Whether Israel tried to starve Gaza or not. Then we checked the conditions of urban warfare, which we believe much of the destruction in Gaza, again, is built in the concept of urban warfare, especially against a rival, which is fighting below ground, is using human shields. Then we checked incidents of accusation of frontal killings by IDF troops of civilians. We moved to aerial bombings, which, by the way, was the most lethal, of course, activity in the Gaza war. We checked the number of casualties and their distribution. And when, in the first 5 chapters, we believe we were able to establish that many of the accusations against the IDF are not justified by the primary sources, we asked ourselves, where does the mistake comes from? And we showed, and I believe we were able to convincingly prove, that humanitarian organizations, NGOs, UN agencies, are inherently unreliable in studying wars, and we looked on their...
Not only in this situation, but...
Not only in this war.
Because they want to prevent wars, because they have a stance against stopping it when it happens. So.
And also, in order to get donations, they need to make the situation as horrible as possible. And sometimes they help the wrong parties. There are a lot of studies about it. But they made very serious mistakes in past wars as well. The problem is in their methodology, and that's what we try to find out. Then we moved to something which, in my opinion, is very important to emphasize. Many of our critics say there are so many testimonies.
So many testimonies
of Israeli wrongdoing in the Gaza war. So many people speak about something, so it must be true. And we brought an example from Iraq. In the 1990s, not even wartime, there were UN sanctions against Iraq. There are stories which you can still read in numerous academics books and articles that hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children died from malnutrition under the sanctions. Now we have the Iraqi data, and we know that it was completely made up. Pictures all across the world media, testimonies of doctors, UN studies. It was not exaggerated. It was not blown off. It was made out of thin air by the Saddam regime. So we study how our mistake becomes a consensus. And in our last chapter, we develop a concept which we call the inverted funnel of information, where we show how a relatively small number of Hamas-controlled sources are influencing dubious NGOs, which are very close to them and work in Gaza. These small NGOs influence the large NGOs and the UN agencies. And of course, many people quote these UN agencies, and suddenly you see it all over. So you think these are many independent sources, but it all goes back to a very narrow basis of problematic sources. And this is a very important part of our methodology as well, to try to trace this process.
Yeah, this is like in psychology, people sometimes discuss this notion of how people are insensitive to correlations between sources. So sometimes different sources are actually strongly correlated. They're not just different signals. And another example is the OxyContin case, where Purdue Pharma basically devised a drug that was highly addictive. And there was one study that shown in a very specific context that it is not addictive. And then this study was cited and cited again in reviews, and then reviews cited the reviews and not a primary source. And eventually it turned out to be highly addictive, causing a major driver of the opioid epidemic. And the correlation between sources was never clear to people who were citing this as evidence. And it became as if it was common scientific knowledge that OxyContin is not addictive, where it really is.
It happens in history and in intelligence as well. Before the Second Iraq War, the American administration, the Bush administration, became convinced that Saddam Hussein is holding weapons of mass destruction. And it was not true. They believe they had several independent sources. One of them was a source of German intelligence, an Iraqi exile known as Curveball, who was actually inventing the material. He was a liar. But they said, okay, but we have other sources. But all of his sources were actually based on the same tainted source, on Curveball.
And people oftentimes cannot get to the primary source. And the question is, the problem is real. Do you think that you were able to get accurate evidence? How did you go about when you tried to understand a specific claim, for example?
I'll give you an example. First of all, I want to say that we can never be certain. We can never be certain that we are right. We can never be certain that our sources are reliable. We can never be certain about our own biases. But what we try to do is to cross-verify, to check as many sources as possible, to get as close as possible to the primary sources. And I think first example I want to give is the issue of the 500 trucks. The 500 truck story. Much of the accusations in the first year of the war against Israel that it is starving the population on Gaza was based on the following story that appeared and reappeared all the time. Before the war, so the story says, there were 500 aid trucks coming into Gaza daily. Some people said food trucks, which is even more wrong. And after the war, some people say 508 trucks, say 150 food trucks. There are several versions of the story. After the war, it collapsed. As Gaza was on the verge of starvation, also before the war, then, of course, if it is collapsing from 500, let's say, to 80, that's starvation. What we did was to check the real numbers of the United Nations. And we checked in 2022 how many food trucks came daily to Gaza. The number is not 500, it's not 150, it's 73. That is, Israel gave to Gaza during the war, in average, 33% more food than it gave before the war. So it's not starvation, it's the opposite of starvation. And this journalist who quoted the 500, I can say where this mistake came from. It came from a wrong calculation. But I don't think it's really matter. What matters is that none of the journalists or scholars that we criticize bothered to take Google, go to the website of OCHA, and check the primary source of the United Nations. This is not Israeli numbers. Israeli numbers are a little bit higher. Also, we checked, for example, in May 2024, the United Nations, UNRWA specifically, campaigned against the upcoming invasion of Rafah. And one of the things they said was that aid collapsed in 70%. Israel, the IDF, Kogat, said that it did not collapse. So there was a factual dispute. What happened after a few months? The United Nations quietly corrected the record, and it's much closer to the record of OCHA. Much closer to the record of Kogat, to the IDF. So to sum it up, the United Nations claimed that there is a collapse in aid, Kogat claimed there is no collapse in aid. After a few months, you see that the United Nations corrected the numbers much closer to IDF numbers without virtually telling anybody. If you use a magnifying glass, you can see little writing at the bottom, retroactive data changes may apply. So that's the way we concluded that Kogat numbers are usually more reliable because even the United Nations, after a few months, corrected it. By the way, this is another phenomenon, which I believe is very important, which we call the silent retroactive correction. That is, you give, a very sensational claim. Aid collapsed in 70%. In the beginning of the war, there was a claim that 70% of the casualties are women and children in Gaza.
Yeah.
Later, it was corrected, but it was corrected silently. And in people's mind, there was still the original claim. Israel killed 70%, women and children. Aid collapsed in 70%. The sensational claim is very loud.
Yeah.
The correction is very, very, very quiet. Another thing, which is very important to say, is that me and my colleagues checked whether in past wars belligerents actually helped their enemies, gave humanitarian aid to enemy-held territories, Israel did in Gaza. Almost no one did. So when we debate whether Israel gave Gaza enough aid or insufficient aid, we need to understand that Israel is the only, almost the only belligerent that gave massive amount of aid to its enemies in war. And this is always forgotten. And I believe it's a structural problem because Israel learned that whenever you adopt you want to excel. You want to do something which is more humanitarian than what the law demands. And the law, the US and the UK interpret the law in a way that it does not oblige them to give humanitarian aid to enemy-held territory in wartime if there is a suspicion that the enemy will use it to its advantage. If you excel, this will become the new baseline. So next time, the demands will be higher. What's the result? The incentive is not to excel. And this is another problem, structural problem, in international humanitarian law today.
So, okay. Now, a pushback that I want to raise is, first, there is the factual question of how many aid trucks went in. And here you're saying a very clear error in the calculations based on UN data rather than IDF data, which can be argued to be, in some cases, motivated.
Though, as I say, it's usually more reliable than UNRWA data, especially.
Although, obviously, there were cases where we saw the IDF not perform as much as right. There were cases where it turned out that the IDF provided information that was more
absolutely, and that's why you have to cross-verify what the IDF says and not to trust it completely. Obviously.
So, but when you talk about UN numbers, they were clear, and this is just an easy thing to check, right? How many went in?
Of course, I must emphasize that there is a discrepancy. IDF numbers of aid trucks tend to be higher, but the discrepancy is not as large as people believe.
The situations where the believability or the reliability of the IDF spokesperson becomes problematic is always these cases where there have been several cases where there was some civilian deaths, and then you get an immediate denial. And then afterwards, it's a similar process to the one that you're highlighting. Afterwards, they try to walk it back. Apparently, it was the case.
But then, to their credit, they say it openly. You wouldn't see, tiny script, retroactive data changes may apply. The IDF spokesperson corrected himself several times. By the way, he is dependent on information he gets from the units. In one case we study, which is one of the cases which are raise suspicion of war crimes, in the Gaza war is the killing of the medical workers in Rafah, of the paramedics in Tel Sultan.
So that was when
I believe it was February 2025.
The case where I think this was like an ambulance and then they were covered, something like that. This is the situation?
No, this was an ambulance that came and a car of 8 trucks, and soldiers who were on alert, on an ambush, just shot at them, first from a longer range and then from a relatively close range. And the IDF spokesperson said in the beginning that the lights were off, so the convoy was suspicious. It was not true. The lights were on. And I think here somebody just didn't tell the truth in the internal IDF investigation.
So I think you would probably agree that the same process that you might see in humanitarian organizations or international organizations that have a motivation to stop war, emphasize its effects, you probably have a sort of tendency to believe the good news on the IDF side. So if you have a soldier telling you, no, everything is fine, you would go out immediately. There's no like due diligence process there because...
And we have this bias as well, but I think we try to overcome it. We consciously try to overcome it. Let me give you an example.
We as...
our team.
Okay.
Our team. We speak about ourselves, not about the Israeli public in general. For example, there was an incident where IDF soldiers shot dead some Palestinian telecommunication technicians close to the Israeli-Gaza border. Though they coordinated the route with the IDF, then the IDF spokesperson said they moved to they made an uncoordinated move, so a unit made a mistake and it shot them dead. And there was an article in 972, local call, which politically it's very far away from me. I often distrust what they write. I think it's a politically motivated site. But in my original instinct was to read the article. Of course, they claimed that the telecommunication workers just did what they were told and were shot anyway. And I remember the gut feeling just to discard this article. And initially we wrote just like that in the study, that they moved to they made an uncoordinated move. But when I thought, let's read it again. And I went over the maps and I went over the route and I said, okay, 972 were right. Probably it was a miscoordination between two IDF units, but of course this shooting raised suspicion of war crimes. So our rivals were right in this case. And I think we always said to hold ourselves and always ask ourselves, are we wrong? And nothing should be discounted, even when it comes from media sources which I believe are often unreliable. I'm just asking for one thing. Don't believe them without seeing the evidence.
So obviously the layperson has no way of, unless they spend so much of their time like you did, unless they're academics or they have access to resources, the layperson is really in a bind, right, in these situations. So we have to sort of outsource to reliable epistemic sources, whether it's academia or
in another study I'm working on, we call it oracles. Sources of information that people usually trust, and to our great misfortune, it's often the United Nations and humanitarian NGOs, which we believe are very unreliable. But here I'd like to make another important point. I think that sometimes we should remain with question marks. In our time, in our era, everybody has to have an opinion about everything. And people don't like to confess they don't know. If you ask me today, who did more war crimes in the Nagorno-Karabakh war, the Azeri side or the Armenian side? Honestly, I don't know. There are, of course, contradicting claims from both sides. I didn't study it. So I think in such a case, it's perfectly okay for the layperson to say, okay, I don't know enough about this conflict.
For sure. So, but obviously would agree that sometimes it's very difficult, even in professional settings, even if you're a professional looking at the evidence, whether you're a news reporter or a scientist or researcher of any kind, to disentangle yourself from priors that you have about reliability of sources, right? So I think the layperson in Israel, when he hears that the Hagari, the spokesperson, said something, so that's obviously true. We have the tendency, because they're part of our group, right? And then the question is, and you say that you actively tried to suppress this parochial instinct as much as you could, understanding that it's not necessarily perfect. But this still has to do with the level of factual data. For sure, I think it's important also another pushback, and I wonder what you think about this level of the factual data. The interpretation, it's not just the average, right? There was also variability along the time axis in terms of how much aid entered into Gaza. And then our perspective can come into play in the way we analyze the data, whether we look at the average or whether we look at the periods where it was so.
For the worst period of the war, from the humanitarian perspective, was spring 2025.
Yeah.
When Israel made, in my opinion, a reprehensible decision to stop the aid to Gaza completely.
Yeah.
Again, I would like to say that Israel is one of the first belligerents ever that actually gave aid. This always have to be remembered. And yet, this was a very big mistake. It was done because they wanted to pressure Hamas to make concessions, and they believe there will be no famine in Gaza because so much aid came during the ceasefire. Yeah. What they didn't understand is that aid gets spoiled, aid gets stolen,
it's not uniformly distributed.
Not uniformly distributed, there is overconsumption. There was never a famine in Gaza.
A famine in the specific sense of people, healthy people dying from starvation.
Yeah, usually it's
people who were sick, didn't get access to resources they needed, and it did increase mortality for
a while, for a very short time. The official Palestinian number is around 400. To give you perspective, if it was really a famine according to the IPC definitions, UN definitions, 400 should have died every day.
Yeah.
And this is the number for the entire war. And the IPC report was a sham. It was even mathematically wrong. Everybody who checked the numbers knew that the numbers don't make sense, and the criteria they chose was very weird. And now we know that there was no famine. They always claimed, way more people died than we know. Okay, a lot of time had passed since the end of the war. The Palestinian Health Ministry always said they will publish this data on indirect deaths, and we don't really see it. Yeah. So if it was mass death from starvation, we would have known it by now.
Yeah, I think it seems to me as well that the picture has settled that there were deaths, but not mass starvation and no definition of famine. But you would agree that now we can maybe start a discussion also about the ethical perspective. And you used the word reprehensible. You thought that this is something that Israel should have continued, regardless of the historical precedents, that because
we hold ourselves to higher standards.
And you hold your country to a higher standard of not letting innocent civilians.
Absolutely. Israel absolutely had to prevent famine and starvation in Gaza. That was my belief all throughout the war.
And at a certain point, it didn't. And now, one perspective that I think I might... the historical perspective matters then in terms of how much legally or morally, how this act should be seen. Okay? And now your argument is that this is quite unique, a unique situation that a country is providing aid to the population, including the militants of its enemy. Right?
We have to be clear about it. There was a price to do that. We extended the war.
Yeah.
Because, if you starve your enemy completely, it will have to surrender sooner.
Yeah.
We chose a long war, also because of the abductees and many other issues, because Israel didn't want military administration over Palestinians, because of international pressure. Longer wars mean more victims.
Yeah.
So this is a real moral dilemma. I was always in favor of giving aid, but I wouldn't like to escape from the costs of his trade-off. By the way, when also you coordinate, people don't understand it. Israel limited the routes of aid trucks. But in a war, you also have to fight, right? And you have to stop fighting in a certain area when aid trucks pass. So you have to limit the number of aid trucks for operational reasons, because you don't pursue a war in order to give more aid trucks. You pursue a war in order to achieve your military goal. And to achieve your military goal, you have to fight. Everything is a trade-off here.
Yeah. But now I think that if I search for a perspective and hear now your hat as a military historian, I'm interested in your perspective. There was a unique, I don't know how unique, situation in Gaza, which is how inescapable it was.
That's very important.
So I think that the reason it's important is that no two situations are ever alike, right? And when I estimate the war now ethically, this becomes an important, if not critical, lens through which I see it. Both in terms of the death toll, we'll talk about it later, but also in terms of providing food. And I wonder what you think about that, because it doesn't seem to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, to my best of ability, people were trapped in Gaza.
Yes, but this has to be reckoned with seriously. First of all, the issue that you trap your enemy, that was the entire idea of a siege throughout history. It's not incidental. When the Western allies, made their blockade over Japan in the end of the Second World War, they called it Operation Starvation. They didn't even try to hide it. The idea was to starve Japan. And by the way, Japan was starving. There was a real famine in Japan at the end of the war. One of the reasons for Japan surrendered, by the way, not only the nuclear bombs. And same in World War II in Germany, and in World War I in Germany. Germany was starving in the end of the war. I think, though, that the issue that Gaza was inescapable matters not only regarding food, but also regarding urban damage and casualties from bombing. As a military historian, I'm not an expert to urban warfare, but I studied urban warfare quite a lot. There are many ways to protect civilians during urban warfare. One is way more efficient than all others. Get them out. All other ways are, if, get them out is here, all other ways are here. They are already very difficult. And in Gaza, it was not possible due to a completely cynical stance of the international community that valued the Palestinian problem over the Palestinians as human beings. So Gaza was inescapable because the international community blocked Gaza. Israel did not block Gazans from escaping. The international community blocked Gaza from escaping. And what
is this true, though? I'm not, is this factually true? What do you mean by blocked? There were no active attempts, I guess.
No one was ready to get Gazan refugees, except very small numbers. Certainly Egypt was not ready to establish temporary camp. Sure. And by the way, the United Nations praised Egypt for closing them, because they foiled the Israeli ethnic cleansing program. I would also add that stupid Israeli ministers that said that's what they want to do, of course, contributed to this disaster. But
Israeli ministers that said our claim is to ethnically cleanse.
Yeah, exactly.
They said we want to ethnically cleanse Gaza, and then the world responded perhaps by not taking any.
But I think it's not an excuse for the international community, because in the past, even in ethnic cleansings, even more in ethnic cleansing, you have to save people.
Yeah.
So, accept them, and then sanction Israel if it will not be ready to bring them back in after the war.
So they didn't give any refugee emergency visas. There were no attempts to bring. I thought, why aren't there ships coming? So there was no active attempt. It's not that the IDF blocked these attempts.
Nobody wanted to receive Gazans. That is the sad truth. And even when Israel tried to establish safe zones inside Gaza, it's not safe zones, it's safer zones.
Yeah.
Because safe zones, according to international law, means that both sides agree that they wouldn't fight there.
So
Hamas refused to cooperate with this. They could have always said, let's take Rafah, we don't fight in Rafah, you won't fight in Rafah, so the civilians will be there. No. Hamas never accepted. They always shot rockets from the safe zone.
For sure. Like, I think it's, at least for me, and I assume that people who listen to this, students or whatever, by this, if you survived until now, a basic premise is that Hamas behaved in a highly reprehensible.
Not only Hamas. I don't want to bring the humanitarian organizations off the hook. Their hands are covered in blood. They refused, or most of them refused, to cooperate with the Israeli plan to establish safe zones, and thus they contributed to increased casualties in the war. We checked, there is a myth which was propagated all around the media that the safe zones were not really safe because Israel bombed in the zone. Yes, it did, because of course Hamas shot rockets from the zones and was hiding its leaders there. But we cross-verified several pieces of data, including Palestinian data, by the way, and BBC verified data. And we established that for a Palestinian civilian, it was 8 to 6 times safer to be in the safer zone than anywhere else in Gaza. So not encouraging people to move to the safe zones was also
for sure,
casualties.
No, for sure, I don't think it's a defensible position. It could be argued that Israel could have, and I think even some right-wing people argue this. Yoaz Hendel, I remember, said, why not bring them to the Negev desert?
One of my colleagues actually proposed this as well, and I think he still supports it. The problem was that we wouldn't get off the hook. People would immediately call it concentration camps in the desert, immediately, because you'll have to surround it by fence, of course, and you have to have.
So you think this was the argument against this? They thought that this would be.
They didn't want to take the responsibility for that, and also it was very difficult politically in Israel to bring Palestinians into Israel, Gazans no less, right after October 7th. So technically, if you bring a lot of food, a lot of water, a lot of medical attention to these places, it would have been better. It would have saved lives, but Israel would have been blamed by everybody.
But there is this element, of course, and there is the element of the conduct that you as a citizen of Israel would have expected Israel to have. And I remember I wrote an article, an opinion article for the first time in my life, right after October 7th, saying basically that I don't think that the mental state of Israeli society right now is going to allow it to conduct a war that is by the book, okay? That is a moral in means and rather than in ends.
Looking backwards, it was by the book, and by the way, more humanitarian than the book, way more than I expected in the beginning.
Perhaps we'll continue talking about it, but the argument was, you have to evacuate as many people as possible because
that's always true.
And it shouldn't have also been the Israeli army leading this thing, which I also didn't understand whether this was something. Why wasn't there an international coalition?
I want to say something about it.
It could have been the entire world that.
But people cared about the Palestinian problem, not about the Palestinians as individuals. I would also say the following. I would encourage our listeners to Google Nahr el-Bared 2007. Nahr el-Bared is a Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon, north of Tripoli, where the Lebanese government fought an Islamist faction in 2007. Put it in Google Images, and you'll see immediately that the camp was completely destroyed, almost like Gaza. This is without tunnels. Tunnels actually force you to destroy virtually everything above the tunnels. Without tens of thousands of booby-trapped buildings that you just have to destroy everything because you can never know what is booby-trapped, or if somebody will come inside in a tunnel and booby-trap it behind your back. So urban warfare is so immensely destructive. In any case, that you have to evacuate people out if you want to save their lives.
And now the situation of a population that is trapped for various reasons, whether it's internal political reasons, global callousness, or international moral posturing, rather than at the bottom line was that there were people who were trapped in Gaza and are still trapped in Gaza for many years, with high risk for their lives. And now this creates a very big moral problem. You would agree, I'm sure.
It is, but here I'd like to challenge you. I think it also creates a moral hazard. And I try to explain what I'm saying. The international community now lives in a state of mind that you should separate between civilians as individuals and what their governments are doing. So people assume Hamas is just like an actor which maybe came from outer space to Gaza, control the population, the innocent population, and doesn't bear any responsibility to what Hamas does. So I agree, of course, that civilians should be protected according to international law. That's not what I'm claiming or trying to challenge here. What happened is that after every war, these endless rounds of escalation between Israel and Gaza, Gaza was devastated, and not as now, but was devastated, and the international community reconstructed Gaza. Not only that Hamas used this money to build the tunnels and this amazing terror infrastructure below and above ground, and it, preserved his administration using this money, it's also freed Hamas from the responsibility of any government to care for the population. So what I'm saying is that there was a moral hazard. Imagine you have a car and you are being told by your company that they will fix your car no matter what you do. Of course, you will neglect the car and you will behave irresponsibly. The car was Gaza. Hamas knew that because the international community believes, it's not the fault of the poor citizens, they will reconstruct Gaza for Hamas anytime. So Hamas felt free to go to devastating wars because somebody else foots the bill. And it's not me that's saying, only me. You saw in the beginning of the war, Musa Abu Marzouk, one of the leaders of Hamas, said I think it was in Al Arabiya TV, he was asked, why don't you build air raid shelters for the population? Why don't you let them in your tunnels? And it's not our responsibility. It's the responsibility of Israel and the United Nations. So the we call it humanitarian bias. This humanitarian, ultra-humanitarian mindset actually incentivizes actors like Hamas to go to more devastating wars. And it's bad for civilians. It's not good for civilians because you are detaching acts from consequences.
It's a real process. A counter argument would be that these processes, these humanitarian safeguards, rules of engagement, reconstruction imperatives, all in all have a very positive effect as well on peace. So
they had a positive effect as long as they were restrained. What happened in the last few decades?
So just to, sorry to stop you, there is this analysis showing the world has become on various scales a relatively more peaceful place, right?
But that was mainly due to US nuclear deterrence. People tend to forget it. And also, even the scholars who wrote it, the last ones were Ona Hathaway and Scott Shapiro in their book, I believe, The Cosmopolitans. even they admit that there are more civil wars than in the past. Why? Because these peace rules that you can never invade another country actually are preserving failed states, often in perpetual situation of civil war. And Gaza is just such a situation. This is a humanitarian bubble preserved by the international community. It wouldn't have been viable otherwise. And the result is ever-escalating wars, and it brought us and the Gazans to October 7th and its consequences.
And okay, so before we move on perhaps to the legal layer, which is, as you said, the third layer of the question and the question of genocide specifically, I want to ask you about, at the moral level, so you agree that Israel had the responsibility to care for civilians. I'm sure you would also agree that we could have done a better job, right?
Did we have the responsibility? No, we didn't. Did we have to do it? Yes, we did. I think it was an ethical imperative. It was not a legal responsibility.
No, I'm talking morally.
I refuse to say that I have to take responsibility over my enemy civilians. This is just absolute nonsense.
So you're saying, okay, but you felt
if I'm giving something, this is what we say in Hebrew, lefanim mesorat hadin. I'm giving it voluntarily. But I want the voluntary act to be recognized. I don't want it to be taken as obvious.
But if
I'm helping my enemy.
It weren't the case from your own perspective as a civilian of Israel, if you would have, you were angry sometimes. I'm certain, right? You were angry at the Israeli government. You said, "Why are you not doing a better job?" I'm sure that there were situations where you felt this way, right?
Absolutely.
And it was a sort of moral.
I felt that we are not prosecuting war crimes enough, and there were war crimes in the Gaza war. I felt there was pervasive looting that shouldn't have happened, and vandalism, and unjustified killings that I think should have been investigated very seriously. I think that aid should not have been stopped in spring 2025. Again, though I think it's voluntary, and we should be praised for doing something voluntary and unprecedented, not condemned of, starving people.
Yeah. But still you were angry. You
yes,
felt
I'm angry.
Moral outrage as a civilian of Israel.
I was angry more than anything else is that our ministers were sometimes so stupid of taking responsibility on evil acts we never did.
Yeah.
So Itamar Ben-Gvir, for example, which is a walking disaster, always said, we will kick all of them out. We will build a policeman neighborhood in Gaza. We didn't do it, but we paid the price as if we did it.
Yes, and that's obviously...
And let me give you something which I heard when I spoke with people in the system. Sometimes we didn't publicize the aid we gave to Gaza or all sorts of things we did. For example, we cooperated in huge vaccination operations of Gazan children during the war twice.
And if Ben-Gvir would have found out, he would have...
keep it quiet so we will not find out and stop it. So we did good things, but we didn't take credit for them because of domestic political calculations.
Okay. Yeah, but... Yeah.
That's the price we paid for having such people in the government.
Yeah, and
it's very hard for me to explain it. I spoke with, let's say, with Egyptian counterparts, diplomats or people I speak with, and I told them, I know it's hard for you to get it. In Egypt, when a minister says something, it's state policy. In Israel, it's not the case.
It's not necessarily the case. Although you could be argued that for sure, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich had causal power over the conduct of the war. Some causal power.
Very few. They had some influence, but they did not have influence over the orders that the army gave them.
No, that's for sure.
Even Amos Harel, is an Haaretz reporter, very critical of Netanyahu, naturally, wrote in his actually excellent book. It's called 629. On October 7th in the Gaza war, that Netanyahu in government meetings, spoke, we should destroy, we should this, we should that, and then gave written orders to the army to adhere to international law.
Yeah, but those now meetings, those protocols would be used in his prosecution.
Luckily, we have opposite protocols as well, when it's very, very clear that orders were given to the army by the cabinet to minimize civilian killings.
Yes.
And we should also say, and I think the statistics will be brought in The Hague to the ICJ, that in some cases 50 or 60% of airstrikes were cancelled due to excessive civilian casualties.
Yeah.
This is not what you do when you want to maximize civilian killings.
Yeah. I agree, but I do want to ask you about the level of moral responsibility or moral outrage or moral where you see the situation in Gaza. You can isolate it and say Israel went out of Gaza, withdrew, they had their ability to build a country there. And this exacerbates their blame significantly. Unlike the West Bank, where it is contested.
Of course, we don't want to withdraw from the West Bank because we understand the same thing will happen in the West Bank. You know,
so there's this concern in the West
meters from Kfar Saba. That's why the two-state solution virtually died after October 7th.
Do you feel this way?
I feel this way. I feel that unless the Palestinians will profoundly change, nobody in Israel will ever take the risk. And profoundly change, what do I mean? When you and I can go to Nablus without any coordination and come back without fear.
That would take some time. So I don't think this way. I think that it's urgent and possible and important to revive the partition of Israel. And I wonder, when I look at the settler violence in Area C, for example.
This is terrible, yes.
And the sort of apartheid-like reality there in Area C, not inside Israel.
I refuse absolutely to accept the apartheid term.
Okay.
Because it's not based on race, it's based on citizenship and security considerations. This is crucial because in white South Africa, nobody would have imagined to have a black Supreme Court judge. We have Arabs here in all walks of life. Palestinians are being kept under military administration, but it's not because we are Muslim or Arabs, but because we are considered a hostile population.
No, but don't you feel this is... In Area C, Area C has how many? Like 400 Jewish people, right? Residents?
400,000.
400,000, yeah. And something like that, Palestinians, right? A little bit less, perhaps, 300,000. I'm not sure the numbers exactly. But there, within Area C, there is, which is more than half of the West Bank in terms of territory, right? You have a very unique situation of two different legal systems for Jewish people and Palestinians.
This is called a military occupation. The reason this military occupation is in place is that the Palestinians refused offer after offer to establish a state in the West Bank when the Israeli public was ready to oblige. And Bill Clinton recently said again, they were offered the entirety of the Gaza Strip and most of the West Bank, and they refused. So I have to keep my security, even if
but then keeping your security, but then we settle this, which is legal.
For many Israelis, this is the heart of the land of Israel. And I may agree, I may disagree, but this is the complex situation on the ground. I think that notwithstanding that Israel was ready to withdraw, when people despaired of the two-state solution, so why not, expand the settlements in these territories? What I want to make actually very clear, that this does give no excuse to settler violence. Even if you accept my position, that it's important to control the West Bank, at least for now, in a state of military occupation, it should be a just occupation. And it's not a just occupation now. And I think that as long as we don't curb settler violence completely, we don't do our duty in the West Bank, and it's a terrible failure.
So even if we agree on that, maybe I have a more unaccepting view on the situation itself and how dire it is. But we both agreed that right now there is, for several years now, the situation in Area C, at least in the West Bank, is one that is immoral.
It's immoral. It's immoral because of settler violence, in my opinion.
Now, this creates...
also because of Palestinian violence. It's not one-sided. I think all violence should be curbed.
Obviously. Now, I wonder what does it mean now for the conduct, for how we should view the conduct of Israel in Gaza. Okay? Let me explain for a second. Okay?
Sorry.
There is a picture of the conflict where you can think of good guys and bad guys. The bad guys attacked, and they did on the 7th of October. Unjustly. There's no... Okay, it was a genocide, I think.
Absolutely.
A small one in scale, relatively.
It was an attempt. Because they had orders to kill everyone they encountered.
I think that's by the legal definitions, perhaps you know more than me, the intent was there, and a substantial number of individuals was killed, and there is no clear number that says when, obviously when you kill 3 people, it's not a genocide, but it's large scale sustained. I think there is a...
What convinced me that it was a genocide was that orders were intercepted to kill everybody you see.
Yeah. Now, the question is whether in dealing with this situation, Israel should have morally not accept this, of course. Okay, not accept that they don't have a right to do this, as some crazy, sorry to use, I try to be as stoic as possible, but crazy stances on the far left justifying October 7th, and this is insane. But whether one can argue that given the complexity and the situation where Israel has not done perhaps everything in its capacity to make a stable situation, okay?
Where?
For the Palestinians.
I think we tried more than enough. You can never be perfect, but Israel proposed the state to the Palestinians so many times, and also gave them Gaza. Gaza was an opportunity to have an informal state in the making. Show us what you can do. They showed us what they can do. They established a terror state. And now we are certain that any Palestinian state is at a risk of turning into a terror state. So I don't blame ourselves for that. Not at all.
I think my argument, which is a little bit nuanced, is this. Israel is not perfect.
Of course, nobody is.
Knowing that there is, for me at least, a sense of some guilt that Israel could have morally been much better, okay? At 48, at 67, at now. I think we could have been much better. I do feel a sense of failure personally. I'm just a sense of not my failure. I'm okay, but as a citizen of Israel, I feel that there have been some failures, and I'm sure you, perhaps to a lesser extent, feel that as well.
Of course, there were war crimes in Israeli history. I wrote 2 articles about the Kfar Qasim massacre, and this is not the only example. But can you give me a country that didn't?
No, for sure. But the question is whether there is, given such a baggage, to the extent that you feel that there is a certain baggage, a moral baggage, that Israel cannot be in a situation when it argues that we are moral, and then we are completely more like...
We are human beings, we can only try to do our best. And I think we did more than our best. There are failures in this war, some serious from the moral sense that I mentioned. maybe the worst, I would say, the failure to prosecute suspected war criminals, the failure to supervise the prisons. I think that was a reprehensible issue in this war.
Yeah.
And what happened in spring 2025. But all in all, we were less cruel than most other states in similar situations.
Yeah.
Certainly in intensive urban warfare, certainly when the enemy is using human shields all throughout, and using subterranean warfare. I don't blame ourselves for that.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what I do blame as well. We should have crushed Hamas sooner. What we did, our biggest sin, is not doing it at the moment that Hamas took power in Gaza. Had we done it back then, there would have been civilian casualties.
Yeah.
Way, way, way less than now. We just neglected this disease, this cancer of Hamas, and let it grow. And then you have to amputate.
So let me try and just finish this thought because I didn't convey it clearly. I apologize. Let's forget about, for example, the failure of Israel to solve or do its best to try and stabilize the situation where life for Palestinians is stable and is livable, which is in Area C problematic. Let's take your example of the failure of Israel to act when Hamas took power violently in Gaza. First democratically, then violently. Right, it was 2007? No, when was it? When there was the... No, never mind.
2007, Hamas coup.
Israel could have, at this point, waged the war with much less
and of course
tunnels, much less munitions, no Iran, no Hezbollah at this level of threat that is also part of the picture, I think, that Israel was facing.
Several fronts at the same time.
And we didn't. Now, this was maybe a strategic mistake. Maybe it was, some argue, I don't buy it, that Netanyahu wanted to divide. I'm not sure.
That's nonsense.
I don't think...
Netanyahu was addicted to peace and to quieting the front.
This is also my perspective. He tried to lie to his political...
by the way, he said it in a cabinet discussion in 2014. He said, in Protective Shield, Operation Protective Shield. He said, occupying Gaza would cause tens of thousands of Palestinian casualties and we'll have to take care of Gaza forever.
Yeah.
About the casualties, he was right.
Yeah.
But maybe back then it would have been way less than now.
Yeah. But this strategic mistake, should it morally be a cost that we incur now that when we engage in war against Hamas? Does it mean perhaps that we should take it into consideration?
Absolutely not. We should have to do anything possible in order to win and in order to remove the Hamas regime, regardless of costs. We should avoid excess cruelty or excess brutality, which is not needed to achieve a situation. But I completely reject the thought that because Israel did mistakes in the past, and indeed we should forsake our civilians now. It makes no sense.
Obviously not absolutely, but then it could mean
if I go to war, I want to win. If I don't want to win, I don't go to war.
Maybe this is what one of the consequences of that. Maybe this war was bound to be so morally costly, so horrible, and that given the fact, morally now, I'm not talking legally, I'm not talking, maybe it was the case that Israel should have tried to mitigate the loss, the strategic loss that it would mean, so that it continues to have a moral image of itself. Forget about how other people view Israel. Maybe we should have, as some have argued, not create so many deaths. Not create, because it's Hamas who...
Most of it was inevitable in an urban war. Hamas in Gaza is an urban war.
No, but maybe...
You don't want to do it, just don't go to fight. And then wait But wait for the next October 7th, which will be larger, and maybe with Hezbollah, And then your people will be genocided. That's the price of having such moral qualms.
Yeah.
I have no moral qualms in protecting my people. I don't want to kill other people for no reason.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to that. I'm sorry, how are we on time? Let me see.
We have 6 minutes, right?
Actually, 36 minutes. Are you okay?
Yeah, until 4.
Do you have energy?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, cool. So let's move on to the question of excess, okay? There were situations, you would agree, where you see excess in Israel's conduct. It could have been mitigated, you're angry. And now this brings us perhaps, so morally, you yourself were angry. That Israel, for example, let people apparently do things without prosecuting them in several cases, perhaps many cases. It seems to be a systematic neglect, right? It seems to me, at least, that there's...
We completely failed in that. I think that one of our biggest failure was to prosecute and seriously investigate war crimes.
Which creates a moral hazard in itself.
Unfortunately, we share this failure with most armies. Look at the record of the British Army in Afghanistan with terrible war crimes like mass executions of prisoners and almost nobody's.
Yeah, this is common to army.
And Vietnam War, numerous war crimes and very few convictions. We share this failure of many others, and of course, it doesn't make it better.
Many excesses existed. Morally, cases of war crimes for sure. Do you think there were crimes against humanity? No.
Because crimes against humanity is a pattern. And I don't think that the
pattern.
And I don't think that the policy was criminal. Actually, I think the policy was humanitarian over the board. And it's so difficult for people to grasp it because they see the disastrous results. And as people in the West don't know what war is, they think the disastrous results mean a disastrous policy intended to cause harm. No, these are the inherent results of an urban war, even if you try to be humanitarian. Maybe we could have done more, but I don't think there was a pattern that Israel tried to harm civilians. Let me give you one...
To harm civilians.
In purpose. Let me give you one interesting example. The most lethal part of the Gaza war was the first few weeks of bombings. Actually, by the way, if you want to maximize civilian casualties, you would expect that casualties will rise throughout the war. Actually, what happened is that civilian casualties went down steadily throughout the war. Israel is blamed that in this very lethal first few weeks, it used enormous amount of ammunition. I believe 26,000 pieces of ammunition, if I remember right. And this is used as condemning evidence. Actually, it's vice versa. One piece of ammunition could kill a few hundred civilians in a packed area. There is less than one civilian casualty per piece of ammunition. This is a pattern of numerous attempts for very precise bombings. Israel did not use only precise munitions, but it couldn't because it doesn't have enough precise munitions. It had many other fronts. So there was no pattern of trying to maximize civilian harm in the Gaza war. Of that, I can be very certain.
So civilian killing for sure, but I think one of the most damning policy level patterns that could be seen is destruction of homes at scale. And that were coupled with statements, including by Netanyahu, concerning transfer.
I would suggest the following thought experiment. Take Netanyahu and Ben Gvir out and put instead of them Yair Golan and Zehava Galon, which have to pursue a similar war. I promise you that the result would have been very, very similar. Why? Because I see other examples. Nar el-Bard in Lebanon, 2007, almost the entire camp was destroyed. Mosul, the old city where most of the fighting took place, was destroyed almost completely. And this is true in Grozny, this is true in Hue, in the Vietnam War, it was true in Manila in World War II, it was true in almost every case of an urban campaign. Mm-hmm. Whether you had a cruel army or a more humanitarian army, whether you have a democratic army or you had an authoritarian army. Mm-hmm. When you have 1,000 of kilometers of tunnels, mm-hmm. when the enemy is booby-trapping tens of thousands of buildings, and of course, if you clear the building, they could emerge from a tunnel and booby-trap the clear building. When Hamas has a policy of using hospitals for military purposes, and schools and kindergartens and many other places, you don't have a way to win this war except destroying the entire urban infrastructure. Mm-hmm. If you don't want to do it, don't go to war.
But don't you think... I think the way I perceive it is that some of the demolition of Gaza was intended potentially as a sort of deterrent. This is how I...
Maybe, because people have complex motives. Mm-hmm. But my argument is not about the motive. My argument is that regardless of your motive, Gaza would have been destroyed. Mm-hmm. You know, whether you suffered from every second or whether you enjoyed it, it's immaterial.
So the consequence would have been quite similar even if it was a liberal...
Yeah, it would have maybe different on the margins, but no more than that.
But don't you see the comments and the by Netanyahu saying it out loud that one of the goals is... evacuation of Palestinians from Gaza? Smotrich, obviously, this is his goal. Okay, for certain, we know that Smotrich and Ben Gvir want to evacuate the citizens of Gaza. Many ministers of the Likud think that this is the solution to Gaza, have said so. And Netanyahu himself has said so. So when I look at this pattern, so I agree with you, and we can talk about it soon, that there is no evidence for an attempt of genocide, okay, of killing the entire, but ethnic cleansing seemed to be really on the table. A crime against, I don't know if it's a crime against humanity, but trying to transfer this population.
But where? No, you know, mm-hmm. the population was not transferred. We are at the end of the war. Yeah. Israel signed an agreement that actually permit people to return to Gaza mm-hmm. if you are not affiliated with Hamas. It signed an agreement about a full reconstruction of a Palestinian Gaza in return for Hamas disarmament. So this is the answer. Mm-hmm. Yes, many threats were made. People were extremely angry after October 7th. Mm-hmm. Yair Golan, by the way, after October 7th, said things which are certainly war crimes, you know, starving Gaza and things like that. Everybody said it because everybody was very, very angry. By the way, I was very careful because I thought about, you know,
you as a historian, you know where it
exactly
that it actually leads sometimes to these situations. It's not just talk.
Exactly. So
an Israeli society,
because it undergone a massacre, the largest massacre since the Holocaust. You need to have a population of angels in order not to have vindicative and even murderous statements. You know, in the Second World War, American admirals spoke about exterminating the Japanese people, root and branch. Mm-hmm. And Pearl Harbor, with all of its severity, was nothing like October 7th.
Yeah. No, for sure. As a psychologist, when I try to look at this through like a professional lens, you get disgusted by these statements, okay, when people say such inhumane things, but then you try to see what are humans like, and this is how humans are like. Which population of which country has ever been in a situation where these things have happened and responded by talking very liberally? So,
always looking from the inside or from the outside, and it makes a difference.
Yeah, the outside view sometimes is cold, but but I do want to talk about the question of genocide. So if So the number of deaths was huge, but this is not the mark of genocide, right?
It wasn't, by the way, it was not huge at all.
It's not considered huge by military?
Such wars, definitely not. And also the ratio of civilians per combatant skilled, we don't know for sure, but it's something close to 2 civilians per combatant, something like that.
So
this is not unusual in urban wars.
Not an
70. We have 73,000. Actually, only 68,000 are identified by name, and we have good reason to assume that most of the people who are absent and not identified are actually combatants, especially buried in tunnels. So we believe Israel now believes that there are around 25,000 combatants among the dead.
Yeah,
it's not a huge margin. It's very kind of typical to such wars, and even on the better side, not on the war side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But I want to challenge our listeners in a different way. Look at the war in Lebanon. You have the same IDF, very, very similar enemy, Hezbollah, and yet the ratio of combatants per civilians is vastly different. Israel now claims it 80% of the dead are combatants. Maybe a bit less, but something like that. The only reason is that the Shiites in South Lebanon could escape, and Palestinians were trapped there by the international community. So the casualties are not a necessary result of excessive cruelness by the IDF, but of battlefield conditions in very cramped civilian areas.
Don't you feel that oftentimes there were aerial bombings of low-ranking Hamas?
That's a mistake that should be corrected. First of all, people use ratios. You know, you can kill, let's say, 100 people if it's Muhammad Def, 20 people if it's a low ranking, and so forth. It doesn't work like that. The articles in 972 or in The Guardian, which don't understand how it works. The way it works is the following.
In the
IDF.
In the IDF.
The number you are given, let's say you are being given the number 20 as accepted civilian casualties in a certain operation. That doesn't mean you can kill 20 people. It means that if you have no other choice, this is acceptable. But you are still obliged and you are expected to reduce civilian casualties as much as possible. So if you are allowed 20, you will still be expected to reach 0, if it's possible. It's not a blank art. It's a very completely mistaken way of seeing it. But I would also like to say about the low-level operators or mid-level operators, that's the bread and butter of urban warfare. This is just the people you want to remove in order to break enemy battlefield formations. So it's not only according to rank. It's very important to kill low-rank operatives. It's just what you're doing. It's the gist of the war. But there was never, ever, ever in the IDF an idea that I can kill 20 civilians, as we say in Hebrew, ala cheshbon. It doesn't work like that. And again, according to the statistics I know, around 50 to 60% of operations were vetoed because of excessive civilian damage, or delayed at least.
Now, the question of genocide, it is a legal definition, right? It requires, it comes from a legal definition, I think, right? It emerged from that. Requires the intent to kill.
It's called in Latin dolus specialis. You need to have an intention to kill in all or in part, to destroy a specific group. By the way, not a political group. They were specifically excluded from the Genocide Convention. And if there is no plan for genocide, which is kind of clear-cut, the intentions need to be clear from your pattern of behavior, but in a way that will not permit any other interpretation. Because if you are saying, I want to destroy Hamas, this is not genocide. So anything you are doing that could serve both intentions, that the intention is not clear, that it could be interpreted as destroying Hamas, it means that it's not genocide. What our enemies are trying to do, they are trying to change the definition. to make it what they call holistic. Which what does it mean, holistic in scholarship? It means that you can decide whatever you want.
Yeah. So obviously this term is used also as part of warfare and generally trying to stop Israel from killing, delegitimize Israel. But at a certain points during the war, I'm just sharing my perspective, okay? I felt that it doesn't matter to me that much whether it tracks the formal definition, which I understand is, I felt that the definition of genocide should be such that it demarcates the difference between war and something else. And I was wondering oftentimes during the war whether it moved towards the something else.
Never even close. Because in order to move to the something else, at least you need to show an intention to maximize civilian killings. If you don't have that, you don't even get to the danger zone.
That's the classical definition, but then I try to...
Otherwise, there is no meaning in using the term genocide. Wars, and it's very... we do not...
But meanings change, right? This we also know from the psychology of concepts. Yes, it's important for legal definitions to be clear so that there is... But definitions do change.
Otherwise, there is inflation. They change, and they change for the worse. If you are using a term, you're expanding it too much, and it's always a huge temptation. Racism, homophobia, transphobia, fascism, feudalism, take what you want.
Yeah.
You expand it, like inflation in money, it's losing its meaning.
It's called in psychology concept creep. I've actually studied that a bit. When the world gets better, people apply the same categories to...
Medievalist Richard Southern wrote a brilliant study about the indulgences of the Catholic Church. And he wrote that in the beginning, when the Catholic Church distributed these indulgences, people treated it very seriously. It was a life-changing event to get an indulgence.
And then it became indulgent, yeah.
And then when the church started to distribute more and more of its indulgences, it lost meaning. People started to look down on them, just like money that you print, which is losing its value.
Yeah, but how common was it in military history? The perspective that I felt and still feel sometimes when I think about this situation is that, let's forget, for example, for a second about the definitions, okay? I know it matters, but what is the situation? The situation now is of people, civilians, not Hamas militants, people who are potentially anti-Hamas, trapped in hell, trapped in a war zone for 2 years, 2.5 years, without anywhere to escape.
But again,
it feels like a concentration camp.
It's not, because they are being concentration camps for people who work to death and starve to death. They are being given enormous amounts of humanitarian aid, and the fact that they cannot emigrate is because nobody is ready to accept them.
Yes, but also oftentimes the enemy comes from above and has no skin in the game in that sense. Oftentimes, for now, for example, it's a different situation where lives of the IDF is threatened, and then you get...
I don't think that it should be in our calculation. What does it matter to the population if the life of the IDF is threatened or not? It matters
it sort of starts to feel like not war, like a situation where you are trapped in an area.
But you have a choice. Hamas can disarm. They signed an agreement. There is an international agreement about reconstruction for disarmament. The mistake we are doing is that we are robbing our rivals from their agency. They cannot do it. They can do. By the way, they can surrender. Hamas could surrender. Now Hamas can disarm and leave Gaza. And leave Gaza to another Palestinian administration. They have a choice. And they choose the bad way. And that's why they suffer. Yeah. I will not reconstruct Gaza to have 1,000 of kilometers of tunnels again. Ever. And why I won't do it? because I know that it will bring an even more destructive war in a few years.
But the extent of the hell, sorry to push so strongly, war is hell, as you started by saying.
The extent of the hell is way less than in many other examples, and way less than it would have been with many other belligerents which are not Israel.
But it is one of the most hellish wars that we've seen in recent years.
Look at Yemen, look at Sudan. These are wars which are way more deadly.
More hellish?
Way more hellish. And real famines, especially in Sudan. But the Palestinian-Israeli war is being just covered 24/7.
Yeah, there's also the element of a democratic country, a rich country.
I see people, of some of Israel's critics saying that, the Palestinians have enough aid, but it's too much pasta and not enough fruits and vegetables. People who live in war zones, the last thing they think about is that if they have fruits or vegetables. They need to have food. So the fact that we are speaking in such a resolution just shows how unusual this war is, but not in the direction you were suggesting, in the very other direction. No, this is not the most hellish war, which is not even close to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so thank you for your discussion and for your perspective. We can agree that regardless of whether this is uniquely hellish, which it's not, as you say, but it was
hell. It was
hell.
War is hell, and this war is hell as well.
And
there are no wars which are clean. There are no wars without war crimes. And there are no wars, especially not urban wars, without an immense suffering of the population. If one wants to avoid that, we shouldn't go to war.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much for talking. This is a very somber, difficult, sad issue. And confusing, right? Because the factual level is confusing, the moral levels is difficult as well. Given the facts, even how do you reconcile it? And different people would reach different conclusions, right? Different people would have different.
Of course.
So thanks for talking to me about this. Thanks you.
A lot. Thanks a lot for hosting me.
Thanks.
Tel Aviv 360, Israel's largest and most diverse podcast.